Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy and this is Disciple Makers. This is a place where we are courageously striving to multiply followers of Jesus Christ. Speaking of the followers of Jesus Christ, those early disciples, you know the list: Peter, James, John, Andrew, Judas, on and on. There were 12 of them. And then there were probably 100 plus others that just followed Jesus around everywhere he went. They had the advantage of seeing the miracles and hearing the parables and seeing Jesus' interaction, seeing Jesus do these incredible mind-blowing things. See crowds of towns to towns coming out to see Jesus. They saw it all. They heard it all. They were inspired by it all. But then you get to the back end of the story of Jesus' life here on earth. And something goes awry with these disciples. Something happens that maybe you experience, and I know I certainly experience, that we aspire to follow Jesus, but sometimes it goes haywire. Sometimes it doesn't feel great. Sometimes we feel lost. Sometimes we feel empty. Sometimes we feel like we've totally betrayed Christ and we can't imagine that he would give us a second chance. Well, that's exactly what happens to the disciples at the end. In fact, the end is near and Jesus is feeling this pressure of about to being arrested. And he goes one last time to this Garden of Gethsemane to pray with his disciples. And he asks his disciples, just stay awake and pray, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to pray, and we'll all pray together for what is about to happen. And 3 times Jesus comes back to his disciples, falling asleep on him. And so then the story continues, and Jesus is arrested, and one of his disciples takes out a sword and cuts off one of the guards' ears. And Jesus says, no, don't you get it? 3 years. 3 years. Do you really think that I'm leading a rebellion? And he picks up the ear and replaces it and heals the servant's ear. And then right in that moment, it says these words in Mark 14, verse 50. Then everyone, all of his disciples, the 12 and others that were there, it says, then everyone deserted him and fled. They all left. They all left. In fact, there's a young man, Mark, presumably Mark, who wrote this gospel. It says that he fled, and as he was leaving, someone pulled off his garments and he fled away naked. The disciples fall asleep on him. The disciples flee from him. The next section of verses, Peter, his closest inner one disciple, denies him 3 times. But yet, as the story unfolds, Jesus goes to the cross. He dies on the cross, sheds his blood for you, for me, for those disciples, for everyone who ever lived. Jesus gives up his life. And then, triumphantly proving once and for all he is God, he rises from the dead. He has victory over sin and death. And then he meets up once again with his disciples. And he says, he puts them on mission. Go and make disciples. Go into all the nations, telling them the good news. He gives them a second chance. He gives them a third chance. He gives them a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th chance. Probably you, me, we so often get discouraged because we fall short. We flee, we run away. We have all this junk that comes into our lives and we think to ourselves, God couldn't possibly give me a second chance with this. But God is in the business of second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth chances. The word the scripture uses to refer to this is grace. There is grace. And so for you, for me, as we are striving to make disciples, as we are striving to grow in our being a disciple of Jesus and helping others to follow Jesus, we cannot forget grace. When you're in the dumps, remember grace. When you fall short, remember grace. When you fall asleep and you feel distant from God, remember grace. When we've deserted Jesus for those stretches of our lives, remember grace. When we deny Him once, maybe even 3 times like Peter did, remember grace. We cannot properly and fully follow Jesus as His disciples if we do not remember grace. Let's remember grace.